we will start with policy influence and, we will do a bit of a recap of the policy influence session that we had previously with Chloe. Besides the recap, we will also take you through a couple of examples that the World Bank itself has implemented in translating research and evidence to policy and how it has worked with governments. And like I said, we would love, really the idea is for all of you to come up to let us know of examples that you've seen where policy has been influenced by evidence. So yeah, I think we can start now, and let me know when you see my screen. Can you see my screen now?
I can't see it yet.
Okay. I'm so sorry. Adrienne, can you share your screen? Yeah, I'm so sorry. I don't know why this is hanging.
Oops, wrong one. Sorry. I'm sharing the wrong PowerPoint. I apologize. Here we go. Can everyone see my screen, the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yes,
Yes,
I
please.
can,
Yes,
I can see.
please.
Great. Okay.
Excellent. Can you move to the second slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is the policy indicators section that we went through in one of our previous sessions with Chloe, where she went through each of these stages of policy impact and policy influence. So the first one was the design, whether the program or the evidence seeking research, whether it contributed to a policy or a program impact, and whether the design of the research, it helped rationalize the program or policy design which was in place. The second part of this was implementation. So whether the baseline informed the program or policy design. So I'm not sure if we went through this in any of our previous sessions, but baseline is what you establish even before doing any sort of research or any sort of implementation of an intervention. So baseline would be your as is scenario. So let's say I go to Ghana and I want to know the crop yield after, let's say I have a fertilizer that I want to see the effects of the fertilizer on the crop growth. It's somewhere in Ghana, right? So my baseline would be, I will go and measure how quickly the crop is growing before I use the fertilizer, or what is the crop yield before I use the fertilizer in my field. So baseline is really something that you do right at the beginning, or what you do right at the beginning before you implement any policy or any intervention. And the third step in this policy influence is completion, to see whether the treatment arm or another element was adopted. So the treatment arm would be one of the interventions that we were implementing in the research design. The second one is whether it influenced other projects, and the third one is whether it motivated the scale up or whether it led to downsizing of a program or policy. And for each of these three indicators, if you would remember, Chloe said specifically for each indicator, we ask if this happened, if this step happened, and if this impact happened, how this happened, and uh, yeah, so that's the big question. And so, of course, we develop not only indicators, but we also develop a set of channels of influence. And the coding for analysis part is, of course, we write code for doing the analysis, but this uh, this part of the session right now would be more on actual policy influence. So, can any of you give me examples that you would know where evidence or some research led to actual policy change, or even if it did not lead to actual policy change, there was an effort to have that evidence lead to a policy change? Because a lot of times evidence is great, but it's not implemented. So, can any of you give me an example of policy influence, or the channels through which the policy influence happened?
If I can just add something, I think it's important to remember, as this slide is showing us, that it's not just about the findings of the research leading to policy change, but also about something that could have happened at the design or implementation stage, like you've created a new set of standards, or a new instrument, a new way to measure success in your area, or created a new database maybe that helped to keep records more efficiently. Those are also something that we're interested in hearing about. So not only like a big policy change, but small things that nevertheless made your work better, or made the work of the Ghanaian Civil Service more effective.
All right, so let's move ahead with the examples that we have. And maybe, I guess, once we tell you of the kind of examples that we have and the kind of examples that we are thinking of, maybe that will, prod you to actually go back and see if you have had similar examples in your life or in your work. So, Adrienne, if you could go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So the examples that we will give you do not come directly from HR practices or wages of the public sector or anything in that area, but they still involve the public sector quite heavily, because once evidence is generated, it is the public sector of a country that assesses the evidence, implements the evidence, and of course does monitoring and evaluation to see if it's working or not. So even though like the ambit of the case studies that we will tell you falls within health or education, but you will still see that this is relevant because this is very much applicable to the public sector, and this will generally give you an idea of how policy influence has happened within the World Bank. So the case study that I will take you through is it happened in Niger, and it used behavioral change activities to improve early childhood development. So what was the background? So many programs in sub-Saharan Africa have provided very short-term responses to food crisis, right? Because proper nutrition has been has been an area of problem in countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So families, of course, need sustained programs to become more resilient and ensure that children get the nutrition they need to thrive. So conditional cash transfers have proven successful previously in reducing poverty and improving health checkups for children and school attendance. And conditional cash transfers are cash transfers where the government or like a body like the World Bank directly sends money to a beneficiary, given that they fulfill fulfill a condition. So it's always contingent on a condition. This program, it was slightly different when in 2011, in the year 2011, the government of Niger, with support from the World Bank and the UNICEF, they established a program which combined unconditional cash transfers, wherein the beneficiaries do not have to fulfill any condition. It's not contingent on any condition. It combined unconditional cash transfers for women in poor rural households and there was also monthly parental training involved in village assembly meetings. It also involved small group meetings and home visits on nutrition, health, child protection, and psychosocial stimulation. Now, what was the eligible, like who were these women that this was aimed at? So the beneficiaries were mothers who had children aged 6 months to 5 years, since that is an age where a lot of physical and mental development happens, and they had to be living in chronically poor households. Now, when this intervention was implemented by the government of Niger, it resulted in mothers improving their nutrition and health practices, which of course translated into positive effects on socio-emotional development. Now, even though it led to positive effects on socio-emotional development, it had no effect on cognitive or physical development of the children. So these were the results of the evidence, the research. Now, policy impact. So the government is using these results to inform the program's national rollout. So it was scaled up. The government actually used these results to modify their own program, hone it, refine it, and then scale it out nationally. And this included refining the program's design and also improving health and sanitation services aimed at program recipients, which are the mothers. Now, when I'm so sorry. So, of course, we see there was a clear policy impact, but in the course of this whole program and this whole intervention, and this was a pretty long intervention. It ran from 2012 to 2016. So in the course of this time, we of course want some policy influence, and that's great. Like the end result is honing and refining the final, the actual program. But what are some of the additional impacts? If you go back to the session and the recap that we just did, it also talks about whether the program had additional impacts. So this program did have additional impacts where the results of the baseline survey, like I said, baseline is what you establish right before implementing a program or an intervention. So the baseline survey results, they were used to change a couple of things in the program. The first thing was that the survey showed that the children's cognitive development was weaker than expected. So the government, again, reworked the program to give more emphasis on cognitive development. And the second thing was that changes were made in the targeting mechanism to identify poor families after the survey carried out for the impact evaluation showed that the targeting mechanism for the program wasn't working well. So yeah, these were the two additional impacts of the baseline survey. Now the program design was also changed. The government decided that there would be more training and mentoring of the people who deliver the parenting program to improve the quality of the general program, because of the people who are mentoring these households, these mothers, if they are not trained properly and if they don't know their own subject, then it can be tricky and the program will not have its desired effects. And the second part was that after some health clinics turned mothers away when they brought their children in to be checked for possible malnutrition, the government committed again to training health workers so they understand the importance of seeing children who are brought in. So yeah, this is the impact that happened within Niger on the program, and there were also additional impacts. There were also some impacts we saw in other countries and globally. So because Niger was the first country to combine unconditional cash transfers for poorest households with information for parents on how to improve their young children's development. So this also became a model for other countries in the region. So other countries in the region like Senegal, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Mali, Mauritania. So this model became something that these other countries also wanted to emulate. So yeah, this is all that we had with regards to this specific case. And I do realize this is not directly an intervention within the government, but this is very much an intervention where the government was very proactive and wanted to use this evidence to change its policy. And this case study very clearly covers the three parts that we saw in the channel of policy influence. I'll be happy to take any questions if you have some on this case study. If not, then I will give the presentation to Adrienne, who has another case study, which will again tell you about the policy influence.
Any questions about this case study before I share the next one? Okay, I'll quickly share the next case study, and then we are very interested to hear from you about what have been your experiences or what have you observed or heard about. So this is a study that was done in Kenya on inspection regimes in healthcare and their impact on patient safety standards. So again, this isn't exactly a study on the public administration, but it is within the government and the government trying to improve its own practices and through monitoring, which I think is something that's applicable to all government agencies. So hopefully this is relevant to you. Oh, was there a question or a comment? Okay, I'll continue. And if you want to say something, please feel free to unmute or write in the chat. So before the program began, safety and quality regulations for health clinics in Kenya were poorly enforced. So the clinics were visited with a low probability, so for inspection, and the government wanted to increase the impact of these inspections. So they wanted to, the intervention was to either increase the frequency of those inspections. So the clinics would be visited with 100% probability more than once within a year. In some cases, they also had the results of their inspections posted at the clinic. So they were trying to find a way to increase the motivation of these health clinics to improve their health and safety practices. The government worked with the World Bank to test these different inspection procedures in order to improve compliance. And what they found in the end is that when a number of health clinics were all located within the same geographical area, and they all were part of the treatment group, so they were all being inspected, and in some cases they were all having the results posted, this greatly increased the effectiveness of or the compliance of these health facilities, because there was competition within that area. The policy impact, so the study wasn't the study wasn't, I don't believe the study was completely finished by the time that COVID happened, and obviously had some effects. So we don't have these end line effects, but what we do have is policy impact at the baseline stage. So before baseline, there wasn't this regulatory framework for monitoring health facilities, or it wasn't in the same form. And once they began the study, they created a more standardized or updated regulatory framework for monitoring these health facilities in order to actually collect the data, but also but this had further effects because they had this more standard model of what their expectations were. So this is an example of policy influence before even completing the project. Any questions about this case study? I'm realizing, I'm so sorry. I think I have to correct myself because I was reading two case studies at the same time. And I think that, in fact, I know that what I said about the competition in a geographical area for units that were treated all close together, that's actually from a different study that was about schools. And I apologize, I got them confused because I read them at the same time yesterday. This case study, as I said, the research hasn't been published yet, the end results. So what we know is at this baseline stage about this example of them changing the regulatory framework and really changing the standards and expectations for these health facilities and their safety practices. And now that I've made that correction, are there any more questions about this case study? Okay, if there are no questions, we'd really love to hear from you.
For me,
yes.
hello.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I don't have any question, but it has made the whole thing very explanatory.
Great. Do you
Yes.
have any example of something similar happening in your work or that you've heard about that could be just a small change at baseline or a change in implementation or policy influence at the end of a project as well? Any examples?
No, no, I don't have any example as of now, but just that it makes the whole exercise so meaningful to me.
Mm.
And in case you are undertaking any project, there's the steps that you follow.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes the whole thing very simple and very explanatory.
Great.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad. I'm glad that this is making sense and helpful to think about in this way. Alan, can I call on you and ask? I know that you were working on a project with the bank that did have some influence because Chloe was talking about it last week. I wonder if you could share a little bit about what happened in that project and how this influence came about.
Hi, Adrienne.
Yes.
So, so I work with Dan on a project on process productivity. So measuring this the response rate and quality of work processes within government. We wanted to understand um, how effective how people respond to the delivery of tax um, from OECS to the various ministries. So what we did was actually to send some request letters to the various ministries and their departments and ascertain the response time of these requests. So how fast do they respond to the requests that we give to them, and as well whether we also measured the quality of response that they gave to OECS. So out of that, what we realized was that we had some organizations, even within directorates, some providing very effective or good quality responses with regards to the request that we sent through to them, and others also not, providing such responses. So it was like even within ministries, some requests that were sent through was of good quality than others. So then the practice was to within the whole civil service, you can have organizations with best practices that can be disseminated or that can be shared with other organizations who are not doing well. So I think that's my little that I can put across.
I think that's great. That's a great thing to share, that maybe there was more to be done, but that you realized you were able to identify those units that were doing really well and then able to learn from them and disseminate that, which will, I'm sure, continue to have an impact. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share? I also invite you to share if you had something or some research that you did that maybe you discovered some obstacles to policy influence and you weren't able to make the change that you wanted, and we could discuss about those obstacles. Jane, yes, please.
Okay, so there's another project or research that was conducted in 2015 with Martin and Dan on management and productivity in the civil service. So what we did initially, the baseline was to collect information from officers in the civil service on how they go about their daily work, and then on some management practices. So the major finding was that most of the people we spoke with wanted more training in terms of how they do their work. So an intervention was brought in, and the intervention was training. So we had some people who were like trained with other ministries, and we also had another training that was with only the division or the directorates. So only members of the directorates attend a particular training. And so we realized that at the directorates meeting, where we have just people from the same directorates, people could bring out issues very clearly because they could say things that pertain to their unit or directorates. And also with the bigger group, where we have different ministries and departments coming together for the training, we could also get diverse ideas on how people were being managed and how they go about their work. So after the intervention, there was an end-line survey, which so the end-line survey, we spoke to the same people again, and then realized that people who had received the in-house or the smaller unit training had some improvements in their work process in terms of their directors or managers giving them some kind of discretion to do their work. We had some few people also coming from the bigger trainings, but the smaller trainings, we had more people. But one issue that we had with the smaller group or the in-house training was that people also felt shy to talk about issues in their units because their directors were there and they didn't know what the outcome would be if they had to expose some of the negative things. But at the end of the whole survey, some aspects of the civil service work has been improved because for each of the organizations, we're able to come up with policy briefs that could tell specifically the areas that people are not doing well in terms of management practices. And there was an occasion where the head of service went out with a team to actually present to each ministry the areas that they need to improve. And that's brought about some improvement because now people were, the various ministries were aware of the areas that they had to look at again, because those were the things that the participants or the people from the ministry reported to us. Unfortunately, we have not been able to collect enough feedback from the various ministries as to how they are improving the areas that we identified as weak. But certainly, I'm sure there has been some improvement some way, somehow. But it'll be difficult to say for sure which ones actually have improved. But so basically, and I think there were some few review of some of the areas of the staff performance appraisal also from the head of service and some other things which I cannot mention. I mean, some of them I've forgotten about, but I knew that in some areas of the work processes, there were some major improvements. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, it sounds, Jane, it sounds like there was a lot of positive changes, even just learning about the training and the size of the training and what works best for that, I think is impact of that intervention, because it would allow you to continue to use that information in the future. And you also made a change where people were going to be informed about what was working in their ministry and what needed to be improved, which just having that knowledge and information can have a big impact down the line, even if it's not leading to immediate action. So that's great. Does anybody else want to share? Okay, if nobody else wanted to share, maybe I can hand over to Abhishek. So, oh, Daniel, go ahead. before we move on? Daniel, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Hello. Good afternoon. Sorry. Um, yes, I recall the earlier part of my work in the civil service, where my department, management services department, was collaborating with the training institutions, the Civil Service Training Center, Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration, to conduct what we refer to as quality assurance. But basically, it's a training evaluation for training programs. And it had two phases. So in course evaluation, that is, we sat in, administered questionnaire to the course participants as the course or the programs were being rolled out during the training sessions. And we were to focus on few areas. We were to focus on the presentation, focus on then the participants, and then the coordination of the whole training program to identify gaps and lapses so that subsequent programs can be improved. I'm sure, Adrienne, the first part, I think after the first day of this training, you sent us some questionnaire, and subsequently you have been sending us questionnaire online to complete. It followed similar or same pattern. And the objective was that we don't have to wait until another cycle of project before we take corrective action. So if there are things that can be addressed before the next class, before the next day, or before next week, we draw attention of the training coordinators and the management team to address it. The second phase is the course training impact evaluation or survey. And so after 6 months, after 3 months, we went back to find out what has changed after the person came for training, so that information or feedback obtained can be used to improve subsequent programs. And so it is very important sometimes to observe, what you think or you perceive to be good. After getting the feedback, you improve it and it becomes better. And what is better, you improve to become best. Similarly, I'm sure that this policy impact and program baseline data analysis and all that, through our collaboration with training center, ensured some level of improvement as the training programs were delivered. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, for sharing. I think that those surveys and being able to make changes very quickly is something that we don't always think about as a major policy impact, but can have. Certainly, I hope that in this course, I think that we've made changes based on your feedback, and I believe, I think it probably made the course much more worthwhile and helpful to you than maybe it would have been otherwise if we didn't have that feedback and that information as we went along. So even those small and quick studies or surveys can have a big impact on the quality of our work. Thank you so much. Maybe one last person, if you'd like to share, and then we can, or I'll hand over to Abhishek, and we'll do a little more applied data work to bring together everything that we've learned. Okay, why don't I stop sharing, and we can move on to the next part of the presentation. But if you think of something that you'd like to share, please always feel free to raise your hand or write in the chat. And we're really interested in learning more about what you've done. Okay, with that, I'll hand over to Abhishek.
Thanks, Adrienne. So what we are going to do next is basically go through a new data set which World Bank recently released. It basically collects a lot of information on public sector as well as private sector, as in what is the wages. So if you know, consider a government economist vis-a-vis a private sector economist, what is the difference in wage? Similarly, education sector, health sector, across different range of employment. It also looks at overall expenditure that government does on paying wages to its employees. And it covers data on close to 140, 150 countries. It also includes Ghana. So what we are going to basically do is first we will just check this website where the data set sits, and there is a very visual way of showing the data set that they have collected. Some of the key indicators that one can see from the data set are there in the website, and you can see beautiful charts which shows those data sets, those indicators for different countries. Then we will specifically focus on Ghana. So there is a data set which Adrienne will send to all of you. It includes data for Ghana as well as around 50, 60 other countries. It basically looks at wages that people get paid on an average in public sector and in private sector. So we'll look at that data, and this time it would be nice. So basically, all of you, if you can make one simple chart, it's a very simple data set, just two variables. So whatever you feel is a good way of showing us, making a simple chart based on the data which we have. And then maybe we can discuss the charts that you make, and we can discuss why you thought of making this one, what are the good things that your charts capture, maybe some of the things which can, you know, be further introduced in the chart itself. So let me first, Adrienne, meanwhile, can you please share that Excel that I had earlier shared with you with the participants? I can't hear you, Adrienne. You are on mute, but yeah, I mean, please, I'll start with the website first. Meanwhile, if you can please share the data set. So I'm going to share the screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, I can see.
Yes.
Worldwide Bureaucracy.
Okay, so yes, brilliant. So I'm going to, in the chat, I'm going to put the link so that all of you can open it, and then we can browse it. All of us, we can browse it together. I'm just going to put it on the chat.
Okay.
Yes, I have put it there now. If you all can open the link that I just shared. And this page should open up for all of you when you click on that link. Could you all open it? Or if there is any issue, please let me know. Okay, so I'm guessing you guys could open it, but if there is any problem, please feel free to either put it in the chat or just let me know if there is any problem in opening opening this web page. So as I was saying earlier, so the Worldwide Bureaucracy Indicator Dashboard, it's a recently launched data set by the World Bank. and it captures host of information on around 192 indicators, and it relates to public sector as well as private sector, about the wages, number of people who are working there, what is the gender gap, so like how many women work in public sector, how many of them work in private sector, those kind of information are there. So it's a very rich data set. It covers around 202 countries, and it collects data starting from 2000 to 2018. Now, when you scroll down, you would see a few charts. You don't have to do anything. I mean, the moment you open the website, you would see, and when you scroll down, you would see all these charts. Do you all see the chart?
Yes.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yes, I have seen it.
Okay, great. So by default, basically here you would see Argentina, and Argentina is compared with global average, and Argentina is also compared with Latin American and Caribbean countries. For example, here, size of the public sector. So here, the wage bill, how much does government pay? So of the overall expenditure of the government in Argentina, 28% alone is on the wage bill. But globally, that number is also the same, around 28%. Slightly higher for the Latin American countries, around 30%. But what we are going to do, we are more interested in looking at Ghana. So I'm going to make certain changes, and all of you can just follow what I'm going to do now. And it's very simple. And then we would see not Argentina, but Ghana here. So here, this tab here that you see, which has written multiple values, if you just click on it, it will open up, and then you see Argentina is ticked here. If you all can untick it, then Argentina will no more be there in the chart that we see. And it will take some time to refresh, so just give it some time, uh, but it will work. Great. Now this is done. Then we go down because we want to choose Ghana. So we'll just keep moving down. We click on Ghana. And again, it will take some time to refresh. And then you would see that Ghana would appear there. We can continue to have global, because it would be nice to have a benchmark just to compare how Ghana fares when compared with the rest of the world. But we can also choose, we can choose a country which you feel, or a country group which you feel is a comparator with Ghana, because of course Latin American is very different from Ghana. So maybe we will not want to have Latin American here, but some other country. If you can suggest me any country that you would want to have here, I can just choose that country that you think is similar to Ghana. I can choose that country. Do you have any suggestion? What country can we choose?
Sierra Leone.
Okay. Okay, let's do that. So let me untick Latin American, and then we can pick if that country is covered. Yes, so you see that even for Sierra Leone, the data is there. So we click on Sierra Leone. And maybe we can also have, not important, but say, for example, Sub-Saharan African as a group. So we have global average, we have Sub-Saharan African average, we have Sierra Leone, we have also Ghana. So we have selected the countries that we are interested in looking at. And now we'll be looking at, and I would explain what are these charts, what are these variables. But did it work for all of you? Any problem? Can you see the same thing on your screen? Same countries, any problem? Please let me know. Okay, so I'm assuming that all of you could make the changes that we wanted to make, and all of you can see Ghana and compare Ghana with global average, Sierra Leone, and also Sub-Saharan African. So the first chart that automatically comes here is for the wage bill, and this is basically the wage bill for the public sector. So all those people who are in public sector, government has to pay wages to them. So on an annual basis, the total wage bill that the government has to pay. And then we basically look at this. Yeah, please go ahead. Is there any comment or question? Okay, I mean, if at all, please feel free to either put it on the chat box or just stop me and ask your question. So the first thing is the wage bill, that how much the government is paying to its employees, public sector employees. And that is not expressed here as an absolute number, but as a proportion of overall GDP and as a proportion of the overall public expenditure that the government does. What you see, if you look at as a proportion of, say, overall public expenditure, which is the blue bar, the dark blue bar here, in Ghana, of the overall expenditure that the government is incurring, 30% alone goes to paying the wage bill for its employees. And that number is pretty similar. I mean, even the global number is 28%, 28% again for Sierra Leone, and for sub-Saharan African country as a group, the average number is 29%. So Ghana is not very different. All these countries are pretty similar to each other. Even as a proportion of GDP, you see the numbers are pretty similar. The global average is slightly higher, 2 percentage points, but all other countries around 7%. But we now look at some of the details. The overall wage bill, okay, fine. But now let's look at some of the details. So what are we here looking at in the second chart that you see here is that overall private sector, public sector paid employment. So how many people are basically employed in the public sector? So in Ghana, of the overall number of people who are working, currently employed, 27% are in public sector, the blue bar that you see here. So we are right now focusing just on the blue bar, and I'll explain what is this bar and what is this bar. But if you just look at the paid employment, public sector paid employment, 27% in Ghana, 30% globally. But you look at, we don't have the number for Sierra Leone because that number perhaps is missing or that information was not available. But it's slightly higher for sub-Saharan African. So the size of public sector is basically slightly larger in sub-Saharan African country. Now, the difference here that you see, paid employment, formal employment, is basically that, of course, there are many contractual employment, people who are employed on contractual basis. So that is not considered as formal employment. Formal employment are basically people who are permanent workers, and paid employment is basically for formal employment. It only looks at people who are either formally employed or contractually employed. But one thing is that you see here, Ghana is not very different from maybe the global average, but sub-Saharan African, you would see the number is slightly higher. Basically, the size of the public sector is slightly higher in sub-Saharan African as a group. If you focus on Sierra Leone, and where we are only looking at the formal sector employment because the other number is not available here, what you see here basically is that almost 83% of all the people who are employed are in formal government sector, which basically means that the private sector is basically not present there. There are very few people who are working in the private sector. And there could be reasons. Maybe the private sector is struggling. There are too many regulations, and the private sector, they find it very difficult to operate. Or maybe the economic situation right now is very bad and it's not profitable for the private sector. There could be many reasons. I do not know, but this could be some of the possibilities. But looking at this chart, it becomes obvious that there is something going on in Sierra Leone, which is a problem. The problem is that the private sector is basically not present there. And if you don't have private sector, it could be very difficult for the economy to grow as a whole, also to generate enough employment, because public sector on its own may not be generating enough employment. Looking at the chart, it gives you some of those ideas that, okay, there could be some problem. And of course, then you need to build on this and then look at the reasons. any of you would want to, based on what you see here, what you feel is going on, if you would want to share your own opinion based on these numbers that you see here, and do you think it makes sense? Because you know more about Ghana than we do. If you think there is a reason the numbers that we are seeing, and whether it makes sense or not, if any one of you would want to share anything about these charts. Okay. I'll go to next set of charts, and please feel free to, if there's anything that comes to your mind and you would want to share, please feel free. Now, this is another aspect of the data set that we have, where we look at the education level of the public sector workers. And in the first chart that you see here, what we are looking at is basically what proportion of the people who are working in public sector have tertiary education. Basically, they have college education. And we look at this number both for public sector as well as private sector. And this is very striking, at least for Ghana. So what you see here is that in private sector, of all the people who are employed, only 21% have tertiary education. Whereas in public sector, like 67% people have tertiary education. This is a very high number. And if you look at private sector, I mean, it is pretty similar to the global average and better than sub-Saharan African. So the education level, if you look at of Ghana, the workers who are employed in Ghana, is certainly better than sub-Saharan African in private sector. And also it's pretty similar to the global average. But the real difference that you see here is in the public sector. The public sector workforce, the education level is much better than the global average, and certainly better than, of course, sub-Saharan African country as a whole. And there's a massive difference. It's like 20 percentage points more workers have tertiary education in Ghana compared to global average. Would any one of you know what could be the reason, and which explains why we see these numbers based on your experience of working in the government? Is there some criteria which is maybe more stringent than maybe other countries, or maybe people don't prefer private sector, so those who have higher education, they will just sit and wait till they get public sector jobs? I mean, is there any reason that you would want to share with us? Even if I mean, you're not 100% sure, but anything that comes to your mind which possibly could be the reason and you would want us to know, that will be great. I hear some noise. Does anyone want to share anything?
I think
Yeah,
this
please go
presents.
ahead.
Yes, the chart presents a very interesting scenario for us. In Ghana, as
Yeah.
you rightly said, the public sector has more graduates or educated people. One of the reasons is that the private sector has not yet matured to be able to absorb more graduate and people with specialized expertise. So they prefer to employ more people who are middle to lower level of education so that they can pay them, because the graduates, it will cost more to recruit and retain graduates. That is one. Then, because of the economic instability, there has been instances where people have lost their jobs, especially in the private sector. And so culturally, people are reluctant to join the private sector because of the fear that in the any event that the economy undertakes a downturn, you'll be the first to lose your job. And so job security is one of the main reasons. And then the third reason is that for some employees or for some, well, even this one doesn't apply to the tertiary educated people, because I know that for nurses and for teachers, once you finish a nursing training school, you are bound by government to serve the first 5 years with a public service institution. And so once that policy is still there, it means all all graduates who turn out from nursing training schools, teacher training schools, are by legal obligation supposed to be employed by government as the first option. And this is likely to swell the numbers. If you compare to the other regions, maybe there could be, but for Ghana, these three factors are very paramount: job security, then the let me say immaturity or the lack of growth in the private sector, and then government policy to recruit certain category of graduates may have contributed to the high percentage of people who are in the public sector. Thank you.
That's great. That makes a lot of sense, and it explains to great extent why we do see these numbers. Anyone would want to add anything else? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, to add up to that, the private sector basically does not need special skills. But with the public sector, you are required to acquire special skills, as Dan mentioned already, before you are employed over there. So anybody at all can jump into the private sector and begin doing something. So that's why we have a less number of, educated people, or for that matter, professionals in the private sector. But with the public sector, you should be educated to some level and be able to, read and write between the lines. But the private sector basically does not need, special skills like that. That's why you find a lot of people over there.
Yeah.
And also the job security he talked about is very true as well too. So this is the little I have to add to that. Thank you.
No, that's a very valid point. In fact, that is something which every country, when they start their journey of development from low to middle income to middle income to higher income, they go through it, which is basically when you're at a lower ladder of development in terms of per capita income, your manufacturing, which in the private sector is usually the greatest kind of job provider, are low skill manufacturing. So where you may not need people who have to have college degrees, and so it's easier, and that's good also, because finally you have to provide employment to people who may not be having high level of education. But then as you develop, then the economy moves from maybe low skill manufacturing to high skill manufacturing, and then finally to service sector. And then education starts, it matters much more. And then education becomes an important factor even in the private sector. And that is what China is going through right now, because initial phase, a lot of labor cheaply available. Education was not an important factor because China was specializing in low skill manufacturing, like making cloths or textile, these kind of things, where maybe you have to operate machines, and education is not a big factor. But now China has come to a place where it has moved up higher up the ladder, and it has to kind of also start looking at its services sector. And that is one reason what China is facing. The growth has slowed down, because Even China, if you look at the education level of the workforce, it's not great compared to other peer nations. And China is now feeling those issues that okay, it has to train its workers. That of course may not be a problem for Ghana now, but for every country, at some point of time it becomes a problem. Maybe if not now, maybe 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. But then we need to learn from the growth trajectory of other countries, and have to have policies in place right now, because these are things which you cannot, for example, overnight we cannot have a well-trained workforce. So it takes easily 15 to 20 years. So you have to think far ahead in time, 15 20 years, and then start introducing policies right now. But great, I mean, all the points are valid, and it explains to a great extent what we see here. And it no more feels surprising after all the explanations that you all provided from your own experience of working in Ghana. So the next chart that we see here is basically the gender distribution. So in private sector, what proportion of the workforce is female, and similarly in public sector, what proportion of workforce is female. What you see basically here is that, say, for example, Ghana, only 30% of the workforce is female, and it's certainly better in public sector, around 38%. So 8 percentage point more gender equity in public sector relative to private sector. The global average, if you see, of course, in private sector, in public sector, you see it's like close to 46% is female. So although Ghana does better relative to private sector, but relative to global average, still there is some distance to be covered. But if you look at other countries, the peer countries, Sub-Saharan African or Sierra Leone, you see that Ghana certainly does much better than the peer countries. For example, here only 21% of the workforce is female, and only 30% in the government sector. And similarly, Sub-Saharan only 29%, which is like similar, and 34% in public sector. So yes, Ghana does better when it comes to gender neutrality, gender equity in public sector, not so much in private sector, but at least in public sector, relative to peer economies, but still some distance has to be covered when it comes to global averages. One question that I have for you, just want to understand from your experience. I mean, generally, I have seen even in India that, I mean, people prefer, especially female prefer to work in public sector, and there are reasons, especially, I mean, of course, job security and other reasons are there, but that is true for male and female both. But one difference is the fact that, at least in India, in public sector, you can take long-term leave, you can take leave up to 1 year or 2 years, and it doesn't affect your career progression, and you can come back and join the workforce again. And female may need for maybe, they're starting a new family, and it can be because culturally in many parts of, at least in India, female are supposed to, bear greater burden of raising a child. So, I mean, they can afford to take 1 year, 2 year leave and then come back. It doesn't affect their career progression. It doesn't affect their wages. In private sector, that is not possible in India. So basically, at most, maybe 2 to 3 months, long-term leave would mean you will basically be kicked out of the job. And that's why in India, at least, people would wait for years, especially female, to get a public sector job. Even if they have all the qualification, they will not join private sector. They will wait for extra 3 to 4 years to join a public sector. But for Ghana, do you think there is any reason which makes it more attractive for females to join public sector relative to private sector? Because we do see that there is a great difference. Only 30% of the workforce in private is female, but 38%, certainly much better than private sector. Do you know if there is any reason for this that we see for Ghana here? It could also be about, I'm not sure if it's true, but of course, I mean, there could be wage issues as well, but that there is like, in private sector, it's easier to have wage discrimination. It's slightly more difficult in public sector for similar kind of works. Maybe that is one reason, but do you think that's a reason or any other reason that you can think of which is applicable to Ghana here?
Yeah. Hello?
Mhm.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes. My name is Deborah. For females to public sector is more flexible than the private sector. That is why
Yeah.
probably the rate is higher. Yes.
And flexible in terms
That's
of
why the
like
reason.
leaves.
Yeah, that's what
Okay.
it seems the data is showing that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think generally
Sorry,
that's true for
my
most of
line is
the.
very
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
Did you get
Yeah.
me?
Yeah. Yes, Debbie, we heard you,
Yeah.
even though there are
All right.
breaks. Yeah, there are breaks in your line, but we heard.
Yeah, my network is very bad. Okay. All right. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.
Yes, hello, can I come in?
Yes. Yes, please do. Yeah.
Good. One of the reasons is that there is a very conscious effort at the governance level, at the leadership level of the public sector to encourage or to recruit and retain more women. Um, Not long ago, there were gender dexes, for instance, in some key public service institutions to ensure that the working environment is not hostile to women. That is one. Then, in the recruitment and selection process, effort is also made to encourage as many women as possible to avail themselves and also identify those who qualify for positions to be appointed. It may not be too obvious all the time, but we see this effort being made, or we are being reminded that in recruitment and in our interaction, we should make sure there are safe spaces for women to also work. Where men are in decision making, we are reminded that decisions should be gender sensitive, and so we I think that the campaign consistently uh, is one of the reasons for this. The other one is that I think generally, I stand to be corrected, but it looks as if now the school enrollment is almost 50-50, or probably even there are more women probably being turned out at various levels of education, basic, secondary, and then the universities. And so the pool of women available to apply for jobs have also increased substantially. And so you see that they are correlating factors. That once
Yeah.
the number of women graduates are increasing, then the likelihood of more women also applying to the public sector will increase. But as my colleague Deborah just said,
Yeah.
there are a lot of flexible working conditions in the public sector than the private sector. For instance, women enjoy 3 months maternity leave in Ghana as a policy, and most of them take it. In addition, they also enjoy the annual leave. Um, Women, both men and women, are paid the same salary so far as they have the same qualification and they are on the same grade. There are no discriminations in terms of salaries or wages of based on gender and whatever. So the women largely sees the public sector as more friendly than the private sector, because the private sector largely determines one's wage on your negotiating ability. So the more you are experienced in negotiating better salary and conditions, and so the women find it sometimes not to be fair as they negotiate, they may not have the skills, or they may not have the courage, or they may not have all it takes to negotiate for better conditions. But for the public sector, these are already determined by government policy. And once you qualify, and once you are on a certain level, you are entitled to everything that a male is entitled to. Yes, thank you. My colleagues may add to it.
Great point. Anyone
Yeah.
else would like to come in?
Yeah, Abhishek.
Yes.
I have a little bit of observation. Comparing the proportion of public sector workers with tertiary education. I feel that my observation is that I don't know when the time period for this data, because if you actually look at it, it may rise, and it may also drop, because in 2015 Ghana went to the IMF to for policy credibility to support the economy and all that. So there were some restrictions in terms of employment, where people were not actually employed into the public sector. So I don't know if that could also be a factor of reducing, maybe if we look at the data within that time span of let's say 2-3 years, that could also actually influence Ghana's comparison of proportion of public sector workers to education to the global statistic that is being provided. That could drop in that sense. Could that, those factors
so
also
just to
be
clarify,
determined?
Yeah, that's a great point. So just to clarify, so for Ghana, the data is for the year 2016. The global average is compared. So of course, we don't have data available for each of the countries for the year 2016. So say plus minus 2 years here and there. So based on that, the global average. So maybe for some country 2014, some countries 2016, some countries 2015. But yeah, I mean, in that range, I would share the data you have, because you said what you said is, yeah, that's great, because maybe, pre when Ghana went to IMF, maybe things were very different. So we also have same numbers for Ghana for the year 2012. So I will share the whole data set. So any one of you who is interested in looking at some of those things can see. So I am happy to share the whole data set. But yeah, please go ahead for with rest of your comments, please.
Sure, and okay, thank you. So I think with the female share of employment, issues about flexibility, as Deborah said, people haven't thinking that, okay, this is a more secured place, more secured working environment for me. In terms of the salary structure, is actually standardized for both men and female, for both male and female. So that could actually inform women's decision to enroll in the public sector, and also conditions of service, and like maternity leave, all these things that you enumerated also could also give rise for females to be within the public space. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Just for my own curiosity, because you mentioned 2015 Ghana went to IMF. I wasn't aware of it. I'm just curious to know. So the exchange rate regime that Ghana follows, is it a flexible or a fixed exchange rate regime? Would you know? Can you please let me know? Anyone?
I'm not very sure. I would have to, maybe if somebody can give, I will have to check in then.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
Are you referring to the exchange rate?
Yes, exchange rate. So whether it is fixed, that okay, always, relative to USA.
No,
whatever,
it is subject to market. It is subject to market forces. It changes on daily basis, weekly basis. It is not fixed. Yes.
Okay. Thanks so much.
So basically, you see that Ghana government's conscious effort to involve women in decision making, it is working, and the women themselves too making themselves available for employment, and the rate at which women are going to school, but also government policy. These things are all working for women participation in the public sector. So government is making conscious effort, and the women themselves too, as a result, are making themselves also available. So all these things are working on the side of the women. Good for Ghana.
Great, great. Yeah, I mean, definitely that's why we see some of these numbers which are like better in Ghana relative to, despite the economic issues that the country recently faced, we see these numbers are quite good relative to peer countries. So just in the interest of time, because I mean, so here I'm not discussing it because basically Ghana, the breakup for Ghana is not available. It basically shows you in public sector, I mean, how many people are employed in health sector, education sector, public administration, and rest of the sectors. We only have number global average and for sub-Saharan African, but we don't have, unfortunately, this number breakup available for Ghana or also for Sierra Leone. So I'm just moving. Yes, please. Does anyone of you want to say anything? Okay. I want to discuss basically one last number which I think is important, and because we were discussing about male to female, and I guess this also explains why female prefer to be in public sector. This basically gives us the number that we see here. It basically tells us the average wages for female relative to male in private sector and in public sector for Ghana, and then for other groups and countries that we have as comparison. And I mean, there are certain good things about Ghana which we discussed earlier, but something which where maybe Ghana needs to do better. Uh, but what we see here is that when it comes to wages, there's a lot of discrimination for females in private sector. So on an average, the wage rate for female in Ghana is only 46% of their male counterpart. And that's worse than any other numbers that you see here. Global average is around 75%. Sierra Leone does very well, 86%. Sub-Saharan Africa as a group also does pretty well, 68%. But this is one area where Ghana fares badly, worse than all other comparison groups that we have here. The wage rate for female in private sector on an average is only 46% of their male counterpart. But you don't see that in public sector. It's almost like in public sectors, the situation is very, very good. So the wages on an average that female enjoy is 94% of the male counterparts. It's in fact better than the global average of 86%. So this is one problem area which I feel needs some attention. I'm sure the government already is aware of, and they are making changes. They're thinking about it. One reason could be, because one of you mentioned that private sector is very small, economy is not doing well. That may lead to some of this discrimination because you would try your best to make sure wherever possible to offer lower wages, and many a times maybe female find it difficult to maybe negotiate wages, or maybe there's some other reasons. Again, I mean, it will be great to hear from all of you because you all know much better than I do about these things. But why do you think we have these numbers for Ghana? I mean, it does better in most of the things that we saw earlier. But when it comes to the wage gap in private sector, not in public sector, it again does pretty well in public sector, but in private sector, there's a huge disparity relative to global average, even Sierra Leone and Sub-Saharan African. Earlier we saw, relative, if not global, relative to Sierra Leone and Sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana did better, but not in this case. Would any one of you know what could be the reason that we see here? This wage gap for female that we see in private sector? I mean, this itself could be a reason why.
Please, I don't really get what you are putting. Are you saying that they pay
so what
at the
I'm
private
trying to
sector?
Yes.
At the private, you mean to say that they pay women lower and pay men higher, or what really?
Yes, yes. So let me try and explain it
Okay,
again. So
hello,
in
can I
private
come?
sector, yeah, please. I'll just explain it one last time. Just I'll try and make it simple, and then please come in. So basically, to put it very simply, in private sector, on an average, suppose the wage rate for male is 100 units, whatever the currency is, 100 units. But for female, the average wage is only 46 units. But in public sector, if the average wage for male is 100 units, the average wage for female is 94 units. So they, I mean, the wages are quite similar in public sector, but not so much in, there's a huge gap in private sector. I hope that clarifies your question. And please go ahead with the comment.
Yes, regarding the wage disparity in the private sector, one of the reasons which I had alluded to was the fact that probably most women or most female may not be versed in negotiating. One thing I have realized is that most women hardly change jobs in Ghana. Once they get employment opportunity with one organization, it is very likely they will remain there until they retire. Unlike men who takes sometimes risk to look for jobs or different jobs when they think that the conditions are not good enough. Maybe once they acquire additional qualifications, they move on to look for other better opportunities, unlike most of the female colleagues. So the stability that maybe the women enjoy may be one of the reasons that does not spur them on to fight for more. But again, we also realize that we have trade unions, staff associations that are supposed to fight for all staff. But in most cases, the executive positions are held by men. And so we may have a situation where uh, the men fight for what is good for the men and not necessarily what is good for women. I think that when it comes to salary negotiations, bargaining, and what have you, that is one area that the females are lacking behind, because in most executive positions, in staff unions and those areas, most women don't participate, or most women are not included, and so that may explain. But there is also, we have to look at it historically, that women historically in Ghana and Africa largely were not participating in formal sector employment. It is a very recent phenomenon that we have a lot more women participating in formal employment. So I believe that maybe it's an evolution, it's a stage we have reached as part of our developmental trajectory, that with time these issues will also be addressed. Mind you, most employers and owners of companies are looking for profits, and so you get what you fight for. In their bid to maximize profits, they look at the three factors of labor: land, labor, capital. And most of the time, the convenient way to cut or to make profit is to reduce the wages. And so I think these are some of the reasons that can account for this disparity. And I think also there is a policy gap. Even though there is equal pay for equal work, we have not seen anybody being sanctioned for paying women beyond certain minimum thresholds. And so once nobody is seen to be regulating that sector, especially pay equality, it is likely employers will take advantage of that gap. Thank you.
Great point. Anyone else, especially any one of the female participants, if you would want to come in and share your experience?
Okay, Mantasha. Hello.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Please
So
go
I
ahead. Yeah.
would like to add something more to what he said. For me, I think in the private sector, the payment is being done based on the number of hours done, and then the male, they tend to do more extra hours compared to the female. Because if you come down here, the extra hours that you need to do as a family woman, sometimes you find it difficult involving yourself in doing an extra hours to earn that more money. But with the male, they get that time to do that extra hours to earn that higher wages compared to the female down here. I think that's something small I'd like to add. So thank you.
That's great observation. Certainly, I mean, that could be one of the big factors. Anyone else who would want to share anything?
I also want to add by saying that within the private sector, we have the males, the dominance of the males in the private sector, where they take risk. So they risk to set up companies and all that, and they usually take on the higher positions. So compared to the females who usually take secretarial duties and all that, so they are usually their salaries in terms of the wages that they get are a bit a bit lower compared to the male, their male counterparts in Ghana. So I think largely that's what the dominance of the male in the private sector, and the private sector is also you find people, there are a lot of males who are entrepreneurs and all that, so you largely find the males dominating in that area, and that could also be a reason.
That's certainly true, and something which we observe in many other countries. So basically, what you're saying is that in private sector, you would see very few women at the top of the hierarchy. Most of them would be maybe at the lower level, but maybe that is not the case in public sector, and there is equitable distribution. So you would find female across different ladders of the hierarchy. And of course, I mean, because there is this distribution, so there are enough number of women getting high salary, which is not the case in private sector, and maybe that's why we see this problem here. Okay, great. So again, I think this is what I wanted to discuss about this data set. There are, of course, other charts, but we don't have enough time. But the idea was basically, I mean, of course, when this survey was done, the idea was not that, I mean, we knew that, okay, there are these issues that different countries face, and
Hello,
we want to...
Hello, Abhishek. Sorry.
Yes, please, yeah.
Yes, we have Mr. Mano. He wants to contribute, but he's unable to unmute.
Sorry, I missed it. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, man.
I don't know if it's the system that. Hello. Hello, Mr. Mano. Sorry. Mr. Mano wants to contribute. If you could help him.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Alan, you said he's unable to unmute. Is that right?
Yes.
Let me see. I can't see the issue on my side. I wonder maybe
or if
joining?
You can put it in chat, or if you can rejoin.
Or putting in the chat, absolutely. Yeah, if you put it in the chat, then when you're done, I can stop and read out so that everyone can see.
Yeah, so meanwhile, I just wanted to focus on the fact that, of course, when this data set, when the survey was done, data set collected, it's not that, there was some question in mind that one wanted to address. But, once you have the data set, and you can have you can analyze it and you would find certain problems or good things, and that could be a lesson. You can use it to inform policy making, because most of the times, even if we know, for example, we all know that okay, there is this gender gap that exists. It happens in most of the countries, but if you don't have specific numbers, it gets difficult to get the attention of the policymakers. Now, instead of just saying that, okay, there is this issue, we need to fix it, if we can, look at this data set and give these numbers and some other numbers, the discussion tends to be much more focused, and then also, it gets more attention, and that can lead to more discussion. Of course, you would look at other data sets, other things that you need. This itself is not enough, but at least it's a good way to kind of generate a structured discussion. And that's how it could be useful, not just for Ghana, but for any country. They can analyze their own data set and they can start some of these difficult conversations. Yeah, Manu, could you join back? Did you want to add something? Okay. If not, I will stop sharing my screen. But anyway, you can, yeah, any question you can mail it to us, or you can also put it in chat. But one thing which we did not get time to do, but I would want to, I hear certain, sorry, I was not looking at the chat box because my screen was on share mode, but I still see some hands raised. Benedict, do you want to say something? And I can.
Yes, I wanted to seek clarification, but I think along the line you mentioned it in your presentation about the wage differentials between the males and the females. I was wondering if the various levels were considered, maybe top, middle, and lower levels. Did we consider the disaggregation or the differentials at those levels before we made the aggregates? I think that if we were able to.
Yes, so let me share it one last time. That's a great point. And because I have this database open here, can you all see my screen again? Is it visible, my screen?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yes, it's it.
So, yeah, so basically what you just said, what is the wage premium? It is not by gender, but it is definitely, it compares public sector and private sector. So for example, here, basically we compare, on an average, the pay that the people who are, clerical, whose work tend to be clerical in nature, how much wage do they get relative to similar work that they do in private sector? And here you see that in public sector, you get higher wage, 16%. For professionals, which is basically mid-level in terms of seniority, you get pretty high, 40%. But then some other levels, that is not true. In fact, private sector pays you more. For example, senior officials, private sector pays you more. Also elementary occupation, which is maybe slightly, you do more work than clerical, your wages are slightly higher. They also tend to get more pay in private sector. But your question was specific to gender. Do we have this sort of classification? I don't think we have that sort of classification where we compare male and female, but we do compare, public administration, for example, education, public health care, and there we compare these broad sectors. We do compare wages that male relative to female, or the other way around, female relative to male get. But that's a valid point. I think it would be interesting to see, the same difference that we see here for gender wise. That may explain, why we see this difference. What is the level where we are coming across these huge gender wage gaps?
Okay, thank you. I was thinking that would also help us better make deductions from the data, because I was considering most of the contributions that were being made, and I was asking a number of questions that were as to whether these may apply to all the levels or it may apply to some of the levels because considering the even at particular levels, another factor that we could also consider is the age groups. You know, women at their productive age require some consideration as compared to men, and then those at their prime age also. So that is what I was asking myself, whether so that it could better inform the deductions and analysis that we're making. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, I mean, you said it right, and that's how, you know, you will take this thing forward. So you basically get some of these basic numbers and you want to kind of solve this problem. But of course, it is not enough to just look at these numbers. It tells you that there is a problem, but then how to deal with it. And some of these questions that you raised, that would be your further focus. You would maybe start collecting data. It is missing here, but then you would start collecting those data and you would find finer details where the problem lies. And that's how, you know, the next step would be. And, you know, finally you will come at a concrete policy proposal that how can, yes, this is a problem, but this is where the problem is, and this is how, these are the sectors which we need to target. And you said it perfectly well that, you know, these things should have been there, would have been good, would have made the analysis much richer. But it is still useful at least to get the conversation started, get attention of your bosses and policymakers, and then, you know, do this further second level of analysis, third level of analysis, and come at a concrete proposal which can help solve the problem that we see here. But thanks for all the comments. I will stop sharing now. So other thing which we wanted to do, but unfortunately which we do not have time to. So we have for one or two indicators specifically related to public sector, private sector wages for Ghana and all other countries. And we wanted you to make a simple chart, like you saw some of the simple charts. So something similar or maybe very different from what you just saw. I mean, you compare Ghana, you pick any country, or you calculate global average, whatever you want to do. And maybe then you can present us your own chart. But nonetheless, what we will do is, Adrienne, I think you already have shared the data. So I think you all must have received the data that we wanted to. It is not yeah, okay. Yeah, so it is not the entire WWBI data set, because that has, like, as we saw earlier, 192 variables, but just two variables out of those 192 variables which we thought are interesting. And if you want, we can share the whole data set as well for you to see all other indicators. But please take your time, you know, next few days, if you can just make one simple chart, and you can maybe, you know, next time when we meet, you can share it with us and we can just discuss the charts that you make. That would be great. But sorry about that. Unfortunately, we have run out of time and we can't do that particular exercise. But hopefully in future sessions, we'll get some time, maybe 15 minutes, where we can come back and discuss the charts that you make. Any other questions that you have before we close it for the day? Any one of you have any question?